It is quite a time to hold political power in America. We've got a pandemic, an overburdened employment system, an uprising against systemic racism, nightly protests outside the Justice Center. What's a governor to do?
I think we need to re-envision how our law enforcement operates in this country.
And I was told I'd have 5 minutes to ask about all of it. And Portland gets 2 weeks without tear gas. And an honest conversation on the front lines.
Hopefully this is a productive part of your night.
Both sides of it.
We have to do better.
Here's the story. Here's the story. Do I sell that hard enough? Hi, I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. If you are new to us, many of you are, a lot of new people showing up to the show every night. This is the show that really, really wants you to have a voice. So let me hear it, or at least read it. Tell me what you're thinking on email. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook. Use my personal favorite platform, Instagram. Or, as always, use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. Let's get started with the show. And our big story tonight is one conversation between myself and Governor Brown. Not an opportunity that we've had very often over these past few extremely important and life-changing months. Most of her appearances have been press conferences with the Oregon Health Authority. And even then, we only really get the chance to ask a couple of questions, but not today. The governor offered us 5 minutes, then gave me 13 minutes instead. So I asked the questions I know you want the answers to. Where does she stand on defunding the police? What about tear gas? How do we keep our communities and officers safe with calls for widespread change? And here's what she had to say. Governor, thank you so much. First, I want to thank you not only for your time today, but for your work and effort over the past few months. I can't imagine the personal stress and sacrifice that you've encountered during these really unprecedented times, so thank you. I do want to say you've committed to a review of Oregon police standards. Yesterday, Mayor Wheeler laid out the start of his plan. It includes cutting a gun crimes task force, transit police. No longer will we have armed officers in schools in Portland. What is your opinion on that phrase, defunding the police, we've been hearing nationwide in our state and in our cities?
Well, I think we can all agree that the police brutality and the violence against protesters that's happening against to taking actions that ensure the safety of all of our communities. And so I think there are a couple of things that we need to look at first. Number one, the People of Color Caucus has a couple of legislative proposals. I look forward to signing those when we get into special session. Number two, as you are aware, the state trains all of the law enforcement community in this state. And I think we need to re-examine our training policies and our accountability measures. I have a team working on that right now. That's where we begin. Here's also what I do know. Actions need to be taken. Good intentions, words are not enough. We have to tackle the racial injustice in this state and this country, and I'm absolutely committed to taking that action and making it happen. We have to have an Oregon that is truly just and equal for all.
What about the concern that cutting crime units is going to cause a rise in violence? For instance, gun crimes in Portland are way up this year. Earlier this year, they were describing the numbers as unprecedented. The gun violence reduction team, they were nearly cut, you might remember, a few years ago by then Chief Danielle Outlaw. But she said it was vital to keeping crime down, primarily in marginalized neighborhoods. And Outlaw is a progressive chief, a woman of color. She left Portland for a larger department in America's 6th largest city in Philadelphia. So, was she wrong there? Is there a concern about cutting these units and seeing a rise in crime?
Look, what I hear Oregonians and Americans and frankly human beings across the world saying is that the violence against people of color, African American people, brown people needs to end. And I think one of the best investments that we can make is tackling the root causes of violence in our country and in our world. And that is by making sure that our families have the support and services that they need, that our kids have a comprehensive system of early childhood education, that we have good childcare, that we can nip the opportunity gaps in the bud, and we can make sure that our children have a seamless system of education, literally from cradle to career, and that every child can achieve his or her or theirs full potential.
So we've been closely watching the way the Portland police handle the protests that we've seen, especially once they turn violent. And there's this big discussion right now over the use of tear gas or CS gas. There are several lawsuits revolving around the use of tear gas in Portland right now. There's a federal judge ruled that police can only use it when lives or safety of the public or the police are at risk. But that's certainly not really a yes or no ruling. I mean, who's to determine the exact moment when lives are at risk? So where do you stand on the use of tear gas by police in Oregon?
Well, in terms of using tear gas against protesters, I think it's unacceptable. But again, I think this goes back to training. And how can we make sure that our law enforcement have different tools and different resources to use so that peacefully and continue to exercise their right of free speech?
So you believe that tear gas should not be used at all, regardless of the circumstance?
That is correct. So I think that you will see the legislature come in and discuss a number of these policies over the next couple of weeks. I think it's really important that we have the discussion. The harsh reality is that the vast majority of our law enforcement are good actors. You have obviously a few outliers.
In an earlier news conference, you said that Mayor Wheeler asked you to deploy the National Guard, and you said that you don't want soldiers in the streets of Portland. And then you criticized President Trump's call for the National Guard troops to be sent to our cities as a scare tactic to intimidate Americans. That said, our police departments use military-grade equipment, armored vehicles, flashbang grenades, military-grade protective gear, assault rifles similar to the guns that Marines carry in war. Do you believe that we should disarm police from these military-grade levels of protection and weaponry?
Look, our systems of law enforcement have been built on racism. I think we need to look at how we train, how we recruit, how we bring in new officers. I think we need to look at new techniques. I think we need to look at new strategies. I know that there are models in other countries and in other communities. I think we need to re-envision how our law enforcement operates in this country. But we know it's been built on a system of racial oppression that needs to end.
That said, police are worried about their own safety. Do you think it's time to take that equipment from them, those armored vehicles, the grenade launchers, the assault rifles?
Look, what I'm really clear about is that we need to really examine how we train law enforcement in this state. I'm committed to doing that, and I am committed to rebuilding as we move into our reopening phase, a more just and equitable Oregon. I think it's critically important that we put the voices of the African American community, of the Black community, of the Latinx community, of our Indigenous community at the forefront of our recovery efforts. I'm committed to making that happen. I think we can work together, we can co-create, we can work collaboratively to build a better Oregon for everyone.
Again, I'm not really hearing an opinion on the weaponry, the military-grade equipment that they use. Are you just not prepared to make a statement as definitive on that right now?
Look, I think it's really important that we change our training methods and the techniques and strategies that law enforcement use.
So, all right, we don't get a lot of opportunities to have one-on-ones with the governor, so I do appreciate her taking time today that she did. And again, we did kind of lightly edit the interview you just saw for time, but there's a whole lot more to that conversation. If you'd like to see the entire 13 minutes, it's on our KGW YouTube channel right now. We also get into the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, so if you want to hear more about that, that is where you can find it. There has been a big fight in Portland and across the country over police departments using tear gas on protesters. I mentioned a bit of that in my conversation with the governor. 3 lawsuits have been filed in Portland over tear gas, and now a federal judge has ruled on the issue, saying that police cannot use it for the next 14 days. There is a caveat, though, and you might have heard me mention that a moment ago, and it's kind of a big one. Kristen Severance has been on the tear gas beat for us this week. She joins us with more on this ruling. So a judge is saying that police can't use tear gas unless what?
So unless lives or safety are at risk. But I mean, that could be kind of a gray area, right? Especially during something like a protest. We've seen night after night sort of this standoff between protesters and police in front of the Justice Center. Police say protesters then begin throwing things. And the city argued in certain instances they need to use tear gas to protect the lives of the people housed or working in the Justice Center.
But the judge didn't completely agree with that justification, right?
No. So the city really focused on the events of Friday, May 29th to make their case here. I know that seems like months ago at this point, but it wasn't too long ago. And that was the very first night of large-scale protests here in Portland. The city argued that a large group of protesters broke into the Justice Center and set fires. More than 300 inmates and county employees were inside at the time, so they had to use tear gas to clear everyone out. But the judge really questioned that, saying, many protesters were trying to get away in that situation, and it was very chaotic. The judge said that tear gas would make it difficult to escape. And the other issue here, and this was argued by the attorney for Don't Shoot Portland, that's the activist group that filed the lawsuit. He said deploying tear gas on thousands of people because a select few are throwing bottles or other objects, it's a violation of protesters' First and Fourth Amendment rights. Your Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. So in the end here, the judge passed this 14-day ban with the caveat that police can use tear gas if lives are in danger. And that's what the mayor had directed police to do just a few days ago. So a lot of back and forth for really the same outcome here, Dan.
That is really kind of an interesting argument that you mentioned there, though. So that if a violent protester is putting an officer's life in danger, but that person is in a crowd of people who aren't breaking any laws, can that officer use force against all of them to stop that just one person?
Well, the city came back and said, though, how can we possibly pick out, the one person or maybe the 5 people causing trouble in a crowd of thousands? So, a lot of back and forth, a lot of strong arguments. We have the 14-day ban. I do not think this is the last time we'll be talking about tear gas.
I think you're right. Kristen, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, I would like to say something before we go to commercial here. I think there's a little confusion with our coverage. I am thankful every day for our police officers. Literally ask anybody who knows me personally. I always champion the amazing people who wear a badge. I worked as a street reporter for more than a decade before I even anchored my very first show, and I worked with police a lot in Florida, in Cleveland, in San Diego, in Dallas, and for the good cops, and that is most of them, by like a huge margin, that job is a calling. Here's what I think about. I don't know what you think about when you think of police, but do you have a family or kids? Imagine kissing your kids goodbye when you go off for your day with a gun on your hip that you might have to use just to see them again. And if that sounds dramatic, ask someone who's married to a cop. And if that sounds dramatic, seriously, ask someone who's married to a cop. All day, police deal with people who are having their worst day. They see some of the saddest and scariest moments that our society can produce. But that is not the story. That's not what this is about. It's about power and how it's being wielded. Don't forget, the police, they work for us. They are an extension of us. We need to be able to question them about how they work, what they do, how they do what they do, how they're funded, how they're trained, all that stuff. When we ask questions about this, for instance, police tactics like this one, where an officer drove through an intersection of people, we got an email. Terry Hutchins wrote it and said, "Yet another liberal bias show. Thought this show would be different and provide balance. Next, you'll get on the bandwagon like other liberal-run cities to defund our police departments." We didn't play that clip to be anti-police. We want to be pro-information. We're not asking police about their tactics to give them a hard time. We're doing it because you deserve to know why they do what they do. That's not liberal. That's not conservative. Viewers are always writing in. They're trying to figure out which way the story leans, which side we're on. We're on your side. When the story continues.
So the way that we maybe get to the better place, you guys, is we have conversations.
A conversation you might not be used to seeing in front of the Justice Center. When the story continues. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Story. If you're new to the show, I'm always asking people if they're new to the show or telling them how to kind of play this little game. We ask you to use the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter a lot. And I think people think I'm always trying to recruit people for ratings. Well, it has a little something to do with it, but it's more because of your brains, all right? You're smart people. You give us great ideas. You tell us what is important in this community, what you want to see us cover. So keep asking those questions. Tell us what you think. Give me clothing recommendations. I don't know why people are always doing that. But you can tweet, email thestory@kgw.com, or DM us on Instagram. Just reach out because we are always listening. That said, Wayne tweeted a question about something that was gone before most of us got a chance to even process it. He said, "Hey Dan, Talk with us about the plywood wall at City Hall that was put up Monday and taken down Tuesday. I'd be happy to talk about that one for you. Yeah, if you haven't been downtown in a while, this is what he's talking about. See, the city installed this plywood enclosure around City Hall in the Portland building to prevent graffiti. And Wayne, just want to make one quick correction here. That actually went up yesterday, and the city decided to take it down yesterday, too. It didn't even make it a full 24 hours. You might still see some parts of it up right now because the city said it might not be able to get it all down until tonight. As for why it came down so quickly, the city said, quote, "We need to put our relationship with the community first. The city of Portland is open for civic engagement, especially now. We need to hear our community's demands for racial injustice, and when those demands even take the form of spray paint." All right. A different wall has become a bit of a flashpoint between police and protesters. I'm talking about that chain link fence install around the Justice Center downtown. Now, while protests, again, have overwhelmingly been nonviolent, most of the tension and the violence when we see it and arrests that we do see, they occur right here in this area, usually late at night. But over the weekend, we witnessed something else, a little calm, you could say, in the eye of the storm. A police sergeant and a protester up against the chain link fence, having a conversation, doing something a little radical, you could say right now, talking calmly about the system that they both agree is broken.
We have to do better. Tiki, if we don't do better, dude, right?
So what's the short-term plan to do better?
What's that?
What's the short-term plan to do better?
I think that you guys are enacting that plan, right? You guys are coming out, you were peacefully protesting, you were demanding a response from our city and our country, right? Part of it, right, is about demanding from our city leaders, like, hey, I just want information, right? I'm a citizen of the city, I want to know what's going on, I want to be involved in the process, and I want to make sure that there's accountability, that there's justice, and that there's equity across the board. That's what we want too. Brother, believe it. Like, I've been I was in the training division for several years. I got to go to trainings across America. Okay. All right? Okay. We are doing better, you guys. I don't know if you got a chance to travel. This city, these officers, and yeah, you know what? We get called to very violent, rapidly evolving situations. Right. That's true. Right. Our goal always is to preserve life. If there are people that are making that possibility less likely, we've got to address that. Hopefully this is a productive part of your night, right? Maybe this is why you guys were here. And what we can do is, hey, let's have people sit down. We used to do a thing called Coffee and Cops, where we would just sit down together, we would have a cup of coffee. I would tell you my name is Trevor. You would tell me your name is? Jacob. And then maybe we come to a better place of understanding. And here's the thing. Tell our city leaders, I think we would all like to have body cams here in the city of Portland.
They tell me to come out.
Please do it. Please do it. We love it. Listen, we're about the accountability.
All right, look, that whole video is about 6 minutes long. Who knows really how long the conversation happened before or after that video right there. Hopefully we see more tough, honest conversations come out of this movement. I mean, that's what this is all about, because that is what's going to force real change way beyond this current moment. Now, this past week or so, some of those conversations have been about reforming, defunding, or even abolishing police entirely. There's a lot of different proposals about how to try and solve the problems that we're dealing with right now. And we're just going to talk a little bit, and just so we're all on the same page here, we want to break down what all these different ideas would mean. Let's start with reforming police departments. Now, up until this point, this has been the most common way of addressing police brutality. Reforms can happen through community policing, which encourages officers to build better ties with the community to earn public trust. Departments can also ban certain practices, things like chokeholds. Some say, though, this doesn't go far enough and doesn't really work to address the core problems. So a step up from that would be defunding. This doesn't necessarily mean draining every single dollar from the police department. Some think police budgets are just too big. So the idea is to take some of that money and to invest that money elsewhere in the community, like education, housing, healthcare, things like that. And that would help disenfranchised communities to lower crime rates, stop more interactions with police, and consequently stop police brutality in those communities. But others want to go a step further, dismantling police departments entirely. That's actually what Minneapolis has pledged to do, but they're still working out exactly what that might look like. One proposal is to rebuild the system with what's called a community-based public safety model. That means police would still focus on dangerous crimes, but they wouldn't deal with issues related to, say, the homeless or mental health. And that brings us to the most extreme proposal: abolishing police. That means completely getting rid of the system of policing and prisons, which a lot of people think are structurally racist. The thinking here is to get rid of the need for police and reduce crime by giving marginalized groups better access to health care, good homes, good education, and good jobs. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of crossover kind of between these proposals. There's not like a defined line in between each one of them. Some parts of the police departments could be reformed, while other parts could be defunded or dismantled. And that's kind of what's happening here in Portland. See, the mayor's plan to defund and dismantle some parts of the police department, including the gun violence reduction team. So let's take a quick minute and talk about what they actually do and what kind of gap they might leave behind. Now, the team is made up of detectives and members of the now defunct gang enforcement team. Basically, whenever there's a shooting that happens, they're notified and they investigate. They also track every shooting in Portland, whether it's a murder, suicide, robbery, whatever. But the team has been accused of focusing too much on gang violence and then targeting people of color. So what happens? The question is, what happens with the gun violence reduction team? What happens when they're gone? Portland police actually talked about that on their podcast in February. And before you ask, yes, the police department has a podcast.
If there was not a specialized unit that was focused on responding to all these shootings, we know that the amount of shootings and injuries and deaths would increase right here in the city of Portland. There's been cities in the recent past, 2 in California that I'm thinking of, that both had to reduce their staffing sizes and did away with their gun violence reduction units. Both agencies saw record numbers of homicides in the year immediately following that. And one of those cities even set a new record the second year after they did away with that team.
Look, there's no argument that Portland deals with a lot of gun violence. It's been pretty bad this year, in fact. You might remember in January, we had double the amount of shootings as the year prior. Those numbers dropped when the shutdown started, but then they got really high again in April. So how are police going to deal with gun violence now? Here's what the police chief said yesterday.
We're going to have to figure that piece out. Those shootings have to get investigated. We have officers in that unit and detectives also. So there'll probably be a combination of the detectives doing the investigative piece, either under the detective division or some other format, and then the officers being reassigned.
Now, we also asked Mayor Ted Wheeler's office what's going to happen, and they said, quote, "This is still a work in progress, though at this time, we don't know exactly what the dissolving of the gun violence reduction team will look like. Some of the functions of the team must still continue." They went on to say, "We are going to work with the Office of Youth Violence Prevention, incoming District Attorney Mike Schmidt, our colleagues in the Portland Police Bureau, and the community to determine the better way to stop gun violence within our community." Somebody asked whether this entire show was stored up in my head. Man, if I could only memorize all this, you don't want to know what's going on up inside my head. No, I'm going to show you how this is all done after the break. And if you got any other questions, now's the time to ask and use that hashtag. Hey, Dan, you can email us at thestory@kgw.com or on Instagram, too. I hear the kids like Instagram. We're going to finish the story next. Hey, little behind-the-scenes question from Debbie from Lake Oswego. She wants to know, how is it that you're able to deliver the story as effortlessly as you do as I stumble over the script? Do you use cue cards or teleprompter or something? Debbie, thank you, first of all. I needed that. It's all an illusion. Second of all, no. Almost every syllable of the show is carefully scripted all day long. See, in fact, all of the KGW newscasts are. I review all the scripts. I write some of the show myself. Producers write the rest, a majority of it. Then we collaborate on all of it. Reporters write all of their own stuff. TV magic is an illusion. Sorry to burst your bubble, or burst my bubble, I guess. All right, shoot. These robots, man, they're crazy. Talking about comments tonight, getting a lot of feedback on my interview with the governor, which we went back and forth on because we aired like an 8-minute interview with her. And of course, we're always trying to keep your attention. So hopefully, and the feedback is felt that it was substantive, but we got into some other stuff. There were some questions about COVID-19 and testing and why we don't have more testing. We did get into that. So if you want to check that out, you can see the entire 13 minutes with Governor Brown today, where we talked about everything from defunding the police to keeping our community safe, all that stuff to COVID-19. It's on the KGW YouTube channel right now. Thank you so much. That's the end of the story. The news at 6:30 is next.